Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Financial Edition. And today we're continuing our reading of The Creature from Jekyll Island from G. Edward Griffin. And today we'll be reading chapter 7, and this will be part 1. Okay. Well, this is a very thick book, so we are moving along very well. I hope you guys are enjoying the little history, financial history. I sure am. And Mr. Griffin sure makes it very simple and succinct and brief. I like that. Okay, here we go. Section 2, a crash course on money. The 8 chapters contained in this and the following section deal with material that is organized by topic, not chronology. Several of them will jump ahead of events that are not covered until later. Furthermore, the scope is such that the reader may wonder what, if any, is the connection with the Federal Reserve System. Please be patient. The importance will eventually become clear. It is the author's intent to cover concepts and principles before looking at events. Without this background, the history of the Federal Reserve is boring. With it, the story emerges as an exciting drama which profoundly affects our lives today. So let us begin this adventure with a few discoveries about the nature of money itself. Chapter 7, The Barbaric Metal. The history and evolution of money, the emergence of gold as the universal money supply, the attempts by governments to cheat their subjects by clipping or debasing gold coins, the reality that any quantity of gold will suffice for a monetary system and that more money does not require more gold. There is a great mystique surrounding the nature of money. It is generally regarded as beyond the understanding of mere mortals. Questions of the origin of money or the mechanism of its creation are seldom matters of public debate. We accept them as facts of life, which are beyond our sphere of control, which is not true. We should question them. Sorry, side note. Thus, in a nation which is founded on the principle of government by the people, and which assumes a high level of understanding among the electorate, the people themselves have blocked out one of the most important factors affecting not only their government, but their personal lives as well. This attitude is not accidental, nor was it always so. There was a time in the fairly recent past when the humble voter, even without formal education, was well informed on money matters and vitally concerned about their political implementation. In fact, as we shall see in a later chapter, major elections were won or lost depending on how candidates stood on this issue of the central bank, on the issue of a central bank. It has been in the interest of the money mandarins, however, to convince the public that now these issues are too complicated for novices. Through the use of technical jargon and by hiding simple reality inside a maze of bewildering procedures, they have caused an understanding of the nature of money to fade from the public consciousness. What is money? The first step in this maneuver was to scramble the definition of money itself. For example, on July 20th, 1975 issue of the New York Times, in an article entitled Money Supply, a Growing Muddle, begins with the question, what is money nowadays? The Wall Street Journal of August 29, 1975 comments, the men and women involved in this arcane exercise of watching the money supply aren't exactly sure what the money supply consists of. A pro-international monetary fund. Oh, sorry, I skipped a line. Okay, let's do that sentence again. The men and women involved in this arcane exercise of watching the money supply aren't exactly sure what the money supply consists of. And in its September 24, 1971 issue, the same paper that's the Wall Street Journal, said a pro-international monetary fund seminar of eminent economists couldn't agree on what money is. I'm sorry, it just sounds funny. Or how banks created. That just sounds funny. I'm sorry. Economists can't agree on what money is. Even the government cannot define money. They made it complicated on purpose. Some years ago, a Mr. A.F. Davis mailed a $10 reserve note to the Treasury Department. In his letter of transmittal, he called attention to the inscription on the bill, which said that it was redeemable in lawful money, and then requested that such money be sent to him. In reply, the Treasury merely sent two $5 bills from a different printing series bearing a similar promise to pay. Mr. Davis responded, "Dear Sir, receipt is hereby acknowledged of two $5 United States notes, which we interpret from your letter are to be considered as lawful money. Are we to infer from this that the Federal Reserve notes are not lawful money? I am enclosing one of the $5 notes which you sent me. I note that it states on the face, the United States of America will pay to the bearer on demand $5. I am hereby demanding $5. A week later, Mr. Davis received the following reply from Acting Treasurer M.E. Slindy. Oh, what a name. Slindy. Dear Mr. Davis, receipt is acknowledged of your letter of December 23rd, transmitting one $5. United States note with a demand for payment of $5. You are advised that the term lawful money has not been defined in federal legislation. The term, actually, the Constitution defines it very clearly, if I may add. The term lawful currency no longer has such special significance. The $5 United States note received with your letter of December 23rd is returned herewith." And that quote was from, as quoted by C.V. Myers, Money and Energy, Weathering the Storm. Now, this is interesting because money is a form of energy. And you can use many other things as currency. Food, service, those can be used as quote unquote money, if you think of it that way. Darien, Connecticut, Soundview Books, 1980, page 161, 163, also by Lawrence S. Ritter, ed. or editor, I think it means, Money and Economic Activity, Boston, Houghton Mifflin, 1967, page 33. The phrases "will pay to the bearer on demand" and "is redeemable in lawful money" were deleted from our currency altogether in 1964. Oh, interesting. Deleted from our note, Federal Reserve note. Is money really so mysterious that it cannot be defined? No, that's my answer. Is it the coin and currency we have in our pockets? Is it numbers in a checking account or electronic impulses on a computer? Does it include the balance in a savings account or the available credit on a charge card? Does it include the value of stocks and bonds, houses, land, or personal possessions? Or is money nothing more than purchasing power? The main function of the Federal Reserve is to regulate the supply of money. Yet, if no one is able to define what money is, how can we have an opinion about how the system is performing? That's ironic, isn't it? The Federal Reserve is supposed to regulate the supply of money, and yet it cannot define what money is. That is ironic. The answer, of course, is that we cannot, and that is exactly the way the cartel wants it. The reason the Federal Reserve appears to be a complicated subject is because most discussions start somewhere in the middle. By the time we get into it, definitions have been scrambled and basic concepts have been assumed. Under such conditions, intellectual chaos is inevitable. If we start at the beginning, however, and deal with such concepts in sequence from the general to the specific, and if we agree on definitions as we go, we shall find to our amazement that the issues are really quite simple. Furthermore, the process is not only painless, it is, believe it or not, intensely interesting. The purpose of this and the next 3 chapters, therefore, is to provide what could be called a crash course on money. It will not be complicated. In fact, you already know how much of what follows. All we shall attempt to do is tie it all together so that it will have continuity and relativity to our subject. When you are through with these next few pages, you will understand money. That's a promise. So let's get started with the basics. What is money? This book should be required text reading in schools, I think. And given the length of the book, it's like 600 pages, you could probably spend a whole semester on it, just studying this book. Anyways, this is my opinion. A working definition. The dictionary is of little help. The economists cannot agree on what money is. It is partly due to the fact that there are so many definitions available that it is difficult to insist that any of them is the obvious choice. For the purpose of our analysis, however, it will be necessary to establish one definition so we can at least know what is meant when the word is used within this context. To that end, we shall introduce our own definition, which has been assembled from bits and dabs taken from numerous sources. The structure is designed not to reflect what we think money ought to be, or to support the view of any particular school of economics, but simply to reduce the concept to its most fundamental essence and to reflect the reality of today's world. It is not necessary to agree or disagree with this definition. It is introduced solely for the purpose of providing an understanding of the world as it is used within these pages. This, then, shall be our working definition. Money is anything which is accepted as a medium of exchange, and it may be classified into the following forms. 1, commodity money. 2, receipt money. 3, fiat money. 4, fractional money. Understanding the difference between these forms of money is practically all we need to know to fully comprehend the Federal Reserve System and to come to a judgment regarding its value to our economy and to our nation. Let us therefore examine each of them in some detail. Barter, which is pre-money. Before there was any kind of money, however, there was barter, and it is important first to understand the link between the two. Barter is defined as that which is directly exchanged for something of like value, and like value is something that each party that's involved defines as like value. Mr. Jones swaps his restored Model T Ford for a Steinway grand piano. And there's a footnote about that. Strictly speaking, each party holds the value of what he is receiving to be more than what he is giving. Otherwise, he would not make the trade. In the mind of the traders, therefore, the items have unequal value. The opinion is shared equally by them both. The shorter explanation, however, is less unwieldy. This exchange is not monetary in nature because both items are valued for themselves rather than held as a medium of exchange to be used later for something else. Note, however, that both items have intrinsic value or they would not be accepted by the other parties. Labor also may be exchanged as barter when it too is perceived to have intrinsic value to the person for whom the labor is performed. The concept of intrinsic value is the key to an understanding of the various forms of money that evolve from the process of barter. Commodity money. In the natural evolution of every society, there always have been one or two items which became more commonly used in barter than all others. This was because they had certain characteristics which made them useful or attractive to almost everyone. Eventually, they were traded not for themselves, but because they represented a storehouse of value, which could be exchanged at a later time for something else. At that point, they ceased being barter and became true money. They were, according to our working definition, a medium of exchange. And since that medium was a commodity of intrinsic value, it may be described as commodity money. Among primitive people, the most unusual item to become commodity money was some form of food, either produce or livestock. Lingering testimony to this fact is our word pecuniary, which means pertaining to money. It is derived from the word pecunia, which is the Latin word for cow. But as society progressed beyond the level of bare existence, items other than food came into general demand. Ornaments were occasionally prized when the food supply was ample, and there is evidence of some societies using colored seashells and unusual stones for this purpose. But these never seriously challenged the use of cattle or sheep or corn or wheat because these staples possess greater intrinsic value for themselves, even if they were not used as money. Metals as money. Eventually, when man learned how to refine crude ores and to craft them into tools or weapons, the metals themselves became of value. This was the dawning of the Bronze Age, in which iron, copper, tin, and bronze were traded between craftsmen and merchants along trade routes and all major seaports. The value of metal ingots was originally determined by weight. Then, as it became customary for the merchants who cast them to stamp the uniform weights on the top, they eventually were valued simply by counting their number. Although they were too large to carry in a pouch, they were still small enough to be transported easily, and in this form they became in effect primitive but functional coins. The primary reason metals became widely used as commodity money is that they meet all of the requirements for convenient trading. In addition to being of intrinsic value for uses other than money, they are not perishable, which is more than one can say, for cows. By melting and reforming, they can be divided into smaller units and conveniently used for purchases of minor items, which is not possible with diamonds, for example, because they are not in great abundance. Small quantities carry high value, which means they're more portable than such items as timber, for example. Perhaps the most important monetary attribute of metals, however, is their ability to be precisely measured. It is important to keep in mind that in its fundamental form and function, money is both a storehouse and a measure of value. It is the reference by which all other things in the economy can be compared. It is essential, however, therefore, that the monetary unit itself be both measurable and constant. The ability to precisely assay metals in both purity and weight makes them ideally suited for this function. Experts may haggle over the precise quality of a gemstone, but an ingot of metal is either 99% pure or it isn't. And it either weighs 100%, 100 ounces, or it doesn't. One's opinion has little to do with it. It is not without reason, therefore, that on every continent and throughout history, man has chosen metals as the ideal storehouse and measure of value. The supremacy of gold. There is one metal, of course, that has been selected by centuries of trial and error above all others. Even today, in a world where money can no longer be defined, the common man instinctively knows that gold will do just fine until something better comes along. We shall leave it to the sociologists to debate why gold has been chosen as the universal money. For our purposes, it is only important to know that it has been. But we should not overlook the possibility that it was an excellent choice. As for quantity, there seems to be just the right amount to keep its value high enough for useful coinage. It is less plentiful than silver, which incidentally has run a close second in the monetary contest. and more abundant than platinum. Either could have served the purpose quite well, but gold has provided what appears to be the perfect compromise. Furthermore, it is a commodity in great demand for purposes other than money. It is sought for both industry and ornament, thus assuring its intrinsic value under all conditions. And of course, its purity and weight can be precisely measured. Silver has more uses than gold. For example, silver is used like in our computer chips, cell phones. It's used in military applications. It's a lot more uses than gold, from what I understand. The misleading theory of quantity. It often is argued that gold is inappropriate as money because it is too limited in supply to satisfy the needs of modern commerce. On the surface, this may sound logical. After all, we do need a lot of money out there to keep the wheels of the economy turning. But upon examination, this turns out to be one of the most childish ideas imaginable. First of all, it is estimated that approximately 45% of all the gold mined throughout the world since the discovery of America is now in government or banking stockpiles. And that was from C. Elgin Gross-Close. Wow, what an interesting name, Gross-Close. Money and Man, a survey of monetary experience, 4th edition, Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma Press, 1976, page 259. There undoubtedly is at least an additional 30% in jewelry, ornaments, and private hoards. Any commodity which exists to the extent of 75% of its total world production since Columbus discovered America can hardly be described as a short supply. The deeper reality, however, is that the supply is not even important. Remember that the primary function of money is to measure the value of the items for which it is exchanged. In this sense, it serves as a yardstick or ruler of value. It really makes no difference if we measure the length of our rug in inches, feet, yards, or meters. We could even manage it quite well in miles if we use decimals and express the result in millimiles. We could even use multiple rulers, but no matter what measurement we use, the reality of what we're measuring does not change. A rug does not become larger just because we have increased the quantity of measurement units by painting additional markers onto our rulers. If the supply of gold in relation to the supply of available goods is so small that a 1-ounce coin would be too valuable for minor transactions, people simply would use half-ounce coins or 10th-ounce coins. The amount of gold in the world does not affect its ability to serve as money. It only affects the quantity that will be used to measure any given transaction. Let us illustrate the point by imagining that we are playing a game of Monopoly. Each person has been given a starting supply of play money with which to transact business. It doesn't take long before we all begin to feel the shortage of cash. If we just had more money, we could really wheel and deal. Let us suppose further that someone discovers another game box of Monopoly sitting in the closet and proposes that the currency from that be added to the game under progress. By general agreement, what little bills are distributed equally among all players? Oh, by general agreement, the little bills are distributed equally among all players. What would happen? The money supply has now been doubled. We all have twice as much money as we did a moment before, but would we be any better off? There is no corresponding increase in the quantity of property, so everyone would bid up the prices of existing pieces until they became twice as expensive. In other words, the law of supply and demand would rapidly seek exactly the same equilibrium as existed with the more limited money supply. When the quantity of money expands without a corresponding increase in goods, the effect is a reduction in the purchasing power of each monetary unit. In other words, nothing really changes except that the quoted price of everything goes up. And that is merely the quoted price, the price as expressed in terms of the monetary unit. In truth, the real price in terms of its relationship to all other prices remains the same. It's merely that the relative value of the money supply has gone down. This, of course, is the classic mechanism of inflation. Prices do not go up. The value of money goes down. If Santa Claus were to visit everyone on Earth next Christmas and leave in our stockings an amount of money exactly equal to the amount we already had, there is no doubt that many would rejoice over the sudden increase in wealth. By New Year's Day, however, prices would have doubled for everything, and the net result on the world standard of living would be exactly zero. There's a footnote here. Those who rush to market first, however, would benefit temporarily from the old prices. Under inflation, those who save are punished. The reason so many people fall for the appealing argument that the economy needs a larger money supply is that they zero in only on the need to increase their supply. If they paused for a moment to reflect on the consequences of the total supply increasing, the nonsense of the proposal becomes immediately apparent. Murray Rothbard, professor of economics at the University of Nevada at Las Vegas, says, "We come to the startling truth that it doesn't matter what the supply of money is. Any supply will do as well as any other supply. The free market will simply adjust by changing the purchasing power or effectiveness of its gold unit. There is no need whatever for any planned increase in the money supply for the supply to rise to offset any condition or to follow any artificial criteria. More money does not supply more capital, is not more productive, does not permit economic growth." Gold guarantees price stability. The Federal Reserve claims that one of its primary objectives is to stabilize prices. In this, of course, it has failed miserably. The irony, however, is that maintaining stable prices is the easiest thing in the world. All we have to do is stop tinkering with the money supply and let the free market do its job. Prices become automatically stable under a commodity money system, and this is particularly true under a gold standard. Economists like to illustrate the workings of the marketplace by creating hypothetical micro and macro economies in which everything is reduced to only a few factors and a few people. In that spirit, therefore, let us create a hypothetical economy consisting of only two classes of people, gold miners and tailors. Let us suppose that the law of supply and demand has settled on a value of 1 ounce of gold to be equal to a fine custom tailored suit of clothes. That means that the labor, tools, materials, and talent required to mine and refine 1 ounce of gold are equally traded for the labor, tools, and talent required to weave and tailor the suit. Excuse me. Up until now, the number of ounces of gold produced each year have been roughly equal to the number of fine suits made each year, so prices have remained stable. The price of a suit is 1 ounce of gold, and the value of 1 ounce of gold is equal to one finely tailored suit. I was thinking, reading this paragraph, I was thinking of John Wick and the John Wick series with their gold coins. It's very interesting, eh? He bought a like a suit with a coin. Interesting. Let us now suppose that the miners, in their quest for a better standard of living, work extra hours and produce more gold this year than previously, or that they discover a new lode of gold which greatly increases the available supply with little extra effort. Now things are no longer in balance. There are more ounces of gold than there are suits. The result of this expansion of the money supply over and above the supply of available goods is the same as in our game of Monopoly. The quoted prices of the suits go up because of the quoted prices of the suits go up because the relative value of the gold has gone down. The process does not end there, however. When the miners see that they're no better off than before in spite of the extra work, and especially when they see the tailors making a greater profit or no increase in labor, some of them decide to put down their picks and turn to the trade of tailoring. Yeah, who wouldn't, right? In other words, oh, excuse me. The weather's kind of dry this morning. In other words, they're responding to the law of supply and demand in labor. When this happens, the annual production of gold goes down while the production of suits goes up. And an equilibrium is reached once again in which suits and gold are traded as before. The free market, if unfettered by politicians and money mechanics, will always maintain a stable price structure, which is automatically regulated by the underlying factor of human effort. The human effort required to extract 1 ounce of gold from the earth will always be approximately equal to the amount of human effort required to provide the goods and services for which it is freely exchanged. Cigarette as money. They use that a lot in the jail system, huh? Cigarettes. A perfect example of how commodities tend to self-regulate their value occurred in Germany at the end of World War II. The German mark had become useless and barter was common. But one item of exchange, namely cigarettes, actually became a commodity money, and they served quite well. Some cigarettes are smuggled into the country, but most of them were brought in by US servicemen. In either case, the quantity was limited and the demand was high. A single cigarette was considered small change. A package of 20 and a carton of 200 served as larger currents of currency. If the exchange rate began to fall too low, in other words, if the quantity of cigarettes tended to expand at a rate faster than the expansion of other goods, the holders of the currency, more than likely, would smoke some of it rather than spend it. The supply would diminish and the value would return to its previous equilibrium. That is not theory. It actually happened. See Galbraith, page 250. With gold as the monetary base, we would expect that improvements in manufacturing technology would gradually reduce the cost of production, causing not stability, but a downward movement of all prices. That downward pressure, however, is partially offset by an increase in the cost of the more sophisticated tools that are required. Furthermore, similar technological efficiencies are being applied in the field of mining, so everything tends to balance out. History has shown that changes in this natural equilibrium are minimal and occur only gradually over a long period of time. For example, in 1913, the year the Federal Reserve was enacted into law, the average annual wage in America was $633. The exchange value of gold that year was $20.67. That means that the average worker earned the equivalent of 30.6 ounces of gold per year. In 1990, the average annual wage had risen to $20,468. That is a whopping increase of 3,233%, an average rise of 42% each year for 77 years. But the exchange value of gold in 1990 had also risen. It was at $386.90 per ounce. The average worker, therefore, was earning the equivalent of 52.9 ounces of gold per year. That is an increase of only 73%, a rise of less than 1% per year over that same period. It is obvious that the dramatic increase in the size of the paycheck was meaningless to the average American. The reality has been a small but steady increase in purchasing power, about 1% per year, that has resulted from the gradual improvement in technology. This and only this has improved the standard of living and brought down real prices, as revealed by the relative value of gold. In areas where personal service is the primary factor and where technology is less important, the stability of gold as a measure of value is even more striking. At the Savoy Hotel in London, one gold sovereign will still buy dinner for three, exactly as it did in 1913. And in ancient Rome, the cost of a finely made toga, belt, and pair of sandals was 1 ounce of gold. That is almost exactly the same cost today, 2,000 years later, for a handcrafted suit, belt, and a pair of dress shoes. There are no central banks or other human institutions which could even come close to providing that kind of price stability, and yet it is totally automatic under a gold standard. In any event, before leaving the subject of gold, we should acknowledge that there is nothing mystical about it. It is merely a commodity, which, because it has intrinsic value and possesses certain qualities, has become accepted throughout history as a medium of exchange. Hitler waged a campaign against gold as a tool of Jewish bankers, but the Nazis traded heavily in gold and largely financed their war machine with it. Lenin claimed that gold was used only to keep the workers in bondage, and that after the revolution it would be used to cover the floors of public lavatories. The Soviet Union under communism became one of the world's biggest producers and users of gold. Economist John Maynard Keynes once dismissed gold as a barbaric metal. I think he did that on purpose, in my opinion. I think any economist would know that gold has an intrinsic value. I don't know. I could be wrong. I'm just speculating here. It's just that interesting that an economist would say gold is a barbaric metal. But anyways, many followers of Keynes today are heavily invested in gold. It is entirely possible, of course, that something other than gold would be better as the basis for money. It's just that in over 2,000 years, no one has been able to find it. And we will stop here for today. I hope you enjoyed that. And we will continue our reading next week for part 2. In the meantime, I hope you guys all have a great day, great week, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.